great.
So as you know, we chatted about the intent of this show, Reflections on Cannabis, is to have real informal conversations with folks that are out there, the movers and shakers of the industry, the folks that have visions and ideas and that. And I've been fortunate to have a good crew of folks to come in, and I've got more scheduled down the line. And I've always been very impressed with your efforts on the medicinal side of cannabis. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat. The way this is set up is we'll just have a conversation for 15, 20 minutes. And
all right.
That. And so for an introduction, I'd like to thank you all for tuning into this video. With me, I have Jahan Marcu, Dr. Jahan Marcu, an expert in medicinal applications to cannabis and that. And Jahan just formed his own company, Marcu Aurora. And hopefully he'll tell us a little bit about their efforts and what they're doing and how we can maybe learn more about what they're doing. And we'll segue into that. First off, Jahan, if you were to think about the cannabis industry as it is now, and obviously your perception of needs are going to be relegated around the medicinal side of that equation. If you could just share kind of where you think the industry is, where it needs to go, what kind of things need to be done, and just kind of provide your driving perspective, if you might. And I'll just turn you loose to share.
Well, I think we've heard so much about what cannabis or hemp, whatever you want to call the same plant, can do. We've talked about, you've probably heard people talking about it can heal the world, it can treat these symptoms. There's even speculations that it could, cure in certain conditions. And there's a lot of speculations right now. And I think the most important thing we need right now is data. That is one of the most important things about these products. People, for some reason, I encounter a lot of, I would call it frighteningly disconnectedness from science and what it is and why we use it, and how often people actually use the scientific method in their daily lives. We experiment with things, it doesn't go right, we change one thing, and then it starts to work and it's repeatable and we can rely on it. But yet, people see a result of cannabis in a petri dish or an in silico computer simulation, and suddenly they're like, we don't need clinical studies. Let's just start using this to treat any old virus that comes along. And I think that we need more. We need to be a little more skeptical and have higher expectations for any facts, good or bad or neutral, that we are going to digest about cannabis. And we also have to get a little bit more serious about these sustainability goals. As some people may or may not know, like the United Nations has posted a very ambitious thing that needs to happen by 2030. There's 17 developmental goals to reach. And one of the things that's not great about cannabis, that here's a factoid people have been throwing around, and I don't have a lot of data, but I heard that indoor cannabis cultivation, as prescribed by regulations in the United States, is the second least friendly environmental industry, because it has to be grown indoors. There's a huge carbon footprint. There's all these other issues. And you have to remember that all people in the United States mostly get to do with something labeled cannabis from a regulatory perspective is use the reproductive organs to create medicine and other products for adult use, and throw the rest of the plant away. And I think that the cannabis plant has a lot more to offer. I mean, unfortunately, we have to treat the roots as a Schedule I substance and destroy them versus extracting them and using their alkaloids or other things. Same goes for the stock. And so I feel like, there's two main issues, I think, facing the cannabis industry. One is a more sustainable industry, and how do they generate more data about what they're doing? And how does that data reach consumers? How can that data improve policy and really help everyone reach their goals?
Yeah, understood. And I've played, we've at ASTM and that work through some of those things with some of the symposium. We're not necessarily looking at specific medical applications, but thinking about the sustainability of the plant with regard to its remediative capabilities and possibility of cleaning soils and literally improving the environment based on the fact that it is a botanical super sucker. That's what we call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, that's why, I started off, as you know, working with the ASTM's D37 committee. And, as life has a way, it gets in the way. And so I'm going to be, coming back to ASTM, I think. And David Valancourt from the GMP Collective has been really like using that vaudeville hook to like pull me back into standards development. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing that sort of volunteer work again in this space, because it really is needed. Like, I think of just simple conceptual things. Like, if people want to buy a cannabis or hemp product that is moving towards those goals, like, oh, this hemp company gives 30% back to, using it to clean up, old factory sites or other stuff for soil remediation, for other uses. Or maybe it's because they have a good, diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. Or maybe it's because they're giving so much to research, and having standards to certify, identify. I think companies will want to be distinguished for what they're doing in the world, with some of these benefits that cannabis offers beyond just something we eat or inhale or apply to our skin. And so that's like one of the things that these continuing development of standards is nice, is because we can start to create those metrics for what do these things look like that we all want. Like, I would love to be able to be like, oh, what companies out there are helping to make hempcrete so that buildings can be made from hemp. It would be awesome to find, like, instead of like the fair trade guy, it's a guy holding a brick or something, like on the package. And those sorts of certifications and seals, I really look forward to seeing more of those that are backed up by an international standard.
I agree. And I've had the good fortune over the last couple of years to work with a group called the National Hemp Co-op. And they formed this co-op for purposes of supplying their hemp conversion biodiesel facility. And they put together an entire distribution-based co-op that covers Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi, and have really reduced their raw material costs by essentially harvesting stuff that would be burned and thrown away and converting that within their facility. And I think that represents a really, really cool model for that idea of sustainability in that. And no, so I completely agree. And you're right. The lack of standards in the industry it hurts the industry, because you get so many different things going in different ways and different outputs, different conclusions, so forth and so on. And even just analysis. I mean, standardizing the analyses that occur based on shifting regulations, which are variable from state to state to state. So it's quite an interesting, interesting place to be able to try.
Well, one thing's for sure for me. I think in a few years, almost everyone who has cannabis in their lives is going to understand what the FDA actually does. And I think you've kind of hit on it. Like, there's all this stuff happening. Who's in charge? As one of my colleagues says, who's minding the store? Like, what's going on with this stuff? Like, it seems a little weird that, we have 4 or 5 different forms of THC that are regulated. You have Schedule 3 Marinol, Schedule 2 Syndrose's liquid preparation, Schedule 1 if it has plant cellulose from the cannabis plant, but apparently not scheduled at all if it comes from the hemp plant. So it's just like, but it's the same compound causing the same effects, same abuse potential, same health effects. So, I think that, there needs to be, like you said, there are there's a lack of adopting standards. There's a lack of self-regulation. And I think part of that is the regulations themselves that aren't friendly. If especially when we're looking at all these federal bills and it's like huge amounts of taxes on top of state taxes. And, it's like, almost like, is the illicit market making up the rules for the regulated market? Because it's like, wow, I don't know about you, but like, I'm not like a business empire mogul, but when I look at some of these regs, I'm like, how would anything succeed? Let's just say, I had like, my father's had a family business for like 30 years. And, there's a lot of taxes in California and he doesn't even sell cannabis, it's like, and I'm like, I can't imagine having a 30% excise tax like some politicians are proposing on top of all the other taxes, especially without banking law. So there's a lot that needs to change, I think, for the industry to be able to be like, yes, we can invest more in research. We can participate in these other activities versus just surviving. But I also feel like there's like a lot of people don't understand what the roles of different groups are. People are like, the FDA isn't doing its job. And it's like, it's not the FDA's job. It is doing its job. It's label claims. That's a lot of what they do, versus like showing up and shutting down a cannabis dispensary that's being naughty. Like that's not really what they do. They're not the DEA. They're not the FBI. They have a narrow lane in which they operate, and it's to approve products for sale across state lines so that you have those standards. And so anyway, I feel like that there is some education for the average person to understand a little bit more how the regulatory system works. And I'm learning like every day the new stuff. But the FDA just put out that article about like quality standards for cannabis and encouraging people to engage in their drug approval pipeline. But it's hard to want to take your CBD product through the FDA approval pipeline when it's just sold freely everywhere in the United States, it seems like.
Right. And from my experience with that, being a guy who's sort of a SME in GMP and coming at least with some experience from the food safety industry, I really appreciate the tenets of, for example, 21 CFR 111 and 21 CFR 117, which are dietary supplement and food safety, but they're all predicated on risk assessment for safety elements relative to human consumption. And GMP is the process that drives that. And even that sort of idea of good quality practices, most industries can learn something from that, and it's a bold step. And I know you go into a grow that they want to be compliant with GMP, and then you begin to show them what the requirements are, and pretty soon they're not so excited about it. And because it is a huge investment in culture and putting the systems in place. But all that being said, I think we are moving forward. I'm seeing more and more emphasis on those type of approaches with the state of Colorado, which I've had the privilege to work with the science and policy group there.
Excellent.
And the state of Nevada, where the regulators are asking the right questions. And how do we base this on risk assessment? Well, that's a great start, at least relative to human consumption, of course, relative to sustainability. Now that's a whole different ballgame. But
yeah. And to that, so as you know, my consulting firm, Marcu and Aurora, that's a lot of actually what we've been doing for a small group of companies. Is some companies have seen the writing on the wall, what people are asking for. They're not asking how safe are your products, they're saying what's the risk, right. And so that's what we find ourselves doing a lot of, is writing up based on the available pharmacotoxicology information. What do we know about the potential risks of these products? And some people just don't want to know. And it's a little frightening. It's like people taking off in a ship sailing the seas, and you're like, there's a bunch of rocks on the starboard side. They're like, wow, that's a risk we don't need to worry about. Full steam ahead. And they just, and then you hit the rocks and they're like, what happened? And you're like, well, we said you shouldn't have psychedelic tinfoil packaging And like we said, you shouldn't have all these things that aren't allowed in regulated areas for your products. And I've definitely seen some, highly questionable practices outside, like especially when it comes to the, cannabinoid derived space. And there's a lot of like weird things that people do when you're like, you don't have to have a research lab to do research. There's so much literature out there to mine and extract from to create potent things to help guide you. And I bet like if you ask most companies, hey, do you have dosing guidelines for your products and how did you generate them? Do you have a pharmacologist? Do you have a toxicologist? So, I have a vision. I have a crystal ball, but it's turbid. I can't quite see it, but I think every cannabis company is going to have a pharmacologist or toxicologist on staff to help them make sense of new information and risks, especially with products. At least it's explained how their products might be working or not working. So I feel like there's going to be, as it always does, what is like really valuable to the industry will change over time. And I don't know, there's not going to be a regulation that's like thou shalt hire a pharmacologist for your cannabis company, but I think it's just going to make sense inevitably that people have these disciplines that you don't have a lot of people trained on cannabis or cannabinoids in these areas. It's a very small area, but I've definitely seen like people from other fields like chemical engineering or material chemistry coming into the cannabis space. And I think that's a really good sign. Every time there's like new experts, new expertise, new knowledge bases coming into the field, I think that's really cool. I really, really like that. Because right now we have this like issue, and I'm sure you're aware of it. You talk to some people, what's the old saying is, I talked to a guy and he was like, well, as I said, well, you can grow cannabis outdoors. You can do mixed lighting. You can use a greenhouse. There's a lot of ways that people over the world, they grow grapes in the south of France, but there's like the tempest wind there, and they gotta have it a mix indoor outdoor. The light's not always right, and they're like, oh, you can't grow cannabis outdoors. Nobody knows how to do that. That's what my cultivator said. I'm like, no. Your cultivator does not have the skill set to grow it outside, but it is absolutely possible to grow plants under the sun. I've seen it happen, and it's like this disconnect, I think, between these basic concepts that we take for granted is that like grow cannabis when we say outdoors, I don't just mean in like an open soccer field. We're talking about a professional operation like the University of Mississippi or other groups that have mixed indoor outdoor, like California. You can find those indoor outdoor structures or like kind of like greenhouses. In certain environments, it's definitely is possible. And more of our cannabis even grown indoors is being gamma irradiated. So I think that's something that people also have to grapple with is just because it's being grown indoors doesn't mean it's cleaner than grown outdoors. It's about the processing, the handling, the manufacturing, the good manufacturing practices. So I think that that's going to be perhaps a shift. And the industry may have regretted not providing regulators with appropriate data and information to make laws that allowed sustainable cultivation, because right now a lot of groups are stuck in these models of cultivation that were approved without any information about their environmental use, their efficiency, their practicality, costs, and things like that. So I think some states, hey, if you're in the middle of the country and you get a lot of sun, you can solar power some of this stuff, great. But there's a lot of states where I think we might have to get used to seasonal cannabis cultivation to have it be sustainable, or again, allowing more outdoor growth. So, I'm a big plants grow with the sun type of guy. I know there's people who've been arguing for centuries that the sun doesn't help plants grow, and it's been a battle.
And I'm happy to say that, and from my experience, I did have a rather large client in the Pacific Northwest who basically grow hemp on about 600 acres in the middle of wine country.
Wow.
And they harvest it and they extract it, and they are very the first thing we did is we aligned them with good agricultural and collection practices so that those elements of practical, safe agricultural work, farming, and that was implemented. And that very successful, and they're making a good profit, and they've got incredible control on their.
Do you need to speak to your assistant there?
She gets in the way sometimes when I'm on a Zoom call, but and really that was their objective from the beginning, and they executed it properly. They incorporated what was, they used a process called Global GAP, which is GACP, and it's an international agricultural standard that you get certified to, and many farmers and that involved with international trade embrace it. And it's essentially GMP on a cultivar or whatever, right? And they went with the GMP for their extraction facility, and they did it right from the beginning. And of course, they were a very deep pocket company, and they could afford to. We built that facility from the ground up, and it was great. It was just, it's really, that's probably the most favorite consulting opportunity that I'm probably the most successful. But all that being said, you're right. There are a lot of opportunities out there. And with regard to Aurora Marcu, you're doing consulting now. You indicated helping clients do risk assessments and that. Are you involved in any way with new medicinal research, for example?
Oh yeah. So I've never given that up, and it's amazing what you can accomplish by email with the internet. It's really wild. When I left academia years ago, it was after I left academia that I published my first clinical work. It was without NIH funding, any government funding, and okay. So it really opened my eyes, and it was just mostly talking to people and wanting to put in the work. There wasn't like some hack or trick or anything. It was just like meeting a clinician, going through their data, their case reports that they wanted to share, writing something up. And also, sharing my interest in research has led to clinicians contacting me saying, I have this data. And some don't keep that great records that you could like pull stuff from that could meet these standards for like a peer-reviewed journal, but others really do. And you don't need much really. And so, I published on opioids and pain with CBD and cannabis, including one study where we tracked dozens of patients in Delaware from time zero when they get their medical cannabis certification in Delaware, as it's called. And these were patients that had neck and back pain and opioid prescriptions, and we tracked their opioid prescription refills and other stuff that we're able to track and observe. And there was a decrease across the board appeared in opioid use, at least as far as we could tell. And it was really surprising for me, because I thought for sure it would be spread out all over the map. There'd be some people whose opioid use increased, but it was just a downward trend. Not everyone like stopped using it, but I was just like, holy cow. And so now, I'm looking at other research projects. We have an adverse events project I'm involved with called Buds Info, BUDS info.com. And it's a little adverse events thing where we're tracking people who, and even if you've never had a bad experience with cannabis, you can still check it out, fill it out. There's less questions if you haven't had an adverse effect. An adverse effect is just an unwanted effect. And we're just trying to understand this, because it's, the collection of this information is not centralized. So, if there's a cannabis product that's causing issues that's in Maryland, and we may not find out that that product is in 6 other states causing the same issue, formulated the same way or something like that. So I think as a public health issue, I've started to take in more public health research, also doing some psychedelics research as well, looking at, I have a presentation that was accepted for the meeting in Ireland that I'm going to in June.
Nice.
For the International Cannabinoid Research Society. And so I'll be sharing kind of a comparison just for fun. I just want to do this for fun my colleague helped me pull the data from a national database, but looking at the safety profile, modern day safety profile, who's showing up to the ER with what, who's reporting adverse events with their doctors for psilocybin versus THC. And I thought it'd just be a fun comparison to
Right.
objectively look and say, well, we have all these preconceived notions about the safety and risk. Obviously, if you're impaired and driving, right. But what drives people to contact a healthcare professional to say, you know what, I took this thing the other day, I felt awful, or it did this thing I didn't expect. And that's the really fascinating part. And sometimes, you don't know if it's a contaminant, adulterant, a drug interaction, or what, or if it really is from the product. So that's like an example of stuff. So, other areas of research include, I'm starting to write for Rolling Stone. So I've written 2 articles for them.
Nice.
One on myths in the psychedelic space, and then another one, I did some research on universities that were in the Final Four that have significant cannabis research programs. And I tried to come up with a system for picking your college basketball teams for tournaments based on their cannabis research output as a factor. But I already had people call me like, none of your teams made it to the finals. I was like, well, maybe next year if they publish in higher impact journals. But so I think I've gotten to explore a lot of different areas of research in terms of literature review, applying new ideas, new lenses to things, but also in the clinical area. And I'm really excited about that. So I think in the future, I'm trying to think, my colleagues are always like, don't talk about it till we publish it. Like, don't say it, because the research can be cutthroat. Because if you tell someone, oh, here's a really simple idea on what we're doing, and they have a bigger team, they're hungrier, they will scoop it right out from under you. And so I'm trying to like imagine my colleagues watching this getting really nervous, biting their fingernails. Is he going to talk about the project? But
no, I totally get that.
But I would say, I think we are exploring how to apply information in a useful way. And I think the most exciting project that I'm volunteering my time for is for what we're calling a cannabis awareness program. And it's folks like me. It's a guy, actually, we brought us together was Tim Schmale, who was a chairman of the American Herbal Products Association, a cannabis and hemp committee, creating their herbal product standards for cannabis, but also opened the first vertically integrated cannabis operation in the Northeast, I believe, in Maine. And he contacted us about doing high school education. Like, there's these schools, they're educating people about cannabis, and they're not giving them useful practical guidance, like, and talking to them like adults, like telling them the difference between buying a dirty Delta 8 product off the street or at a corner store and licensed medical cannabis products that are tested, about the real health risks and real health effects. And it's not just about like, take this and you'll turn into a sloth, but you can talk about reaction times. You can talk about people's some people use cannabis, may not be a significant factor in their life. Other people, they'll run slower, they'll move slower. Other people are affected differently by it. And I think making people more aware of the scientific information. And I mean, no one is really advocating for adolescents to use cannabis, but it's almost like, like safe sex stuff. If they're presented with it, you have to give them guidelines to navigate it and make an informed decision. Because if you just say, just say no, and like they go on Facebook and see pictures of their teachers from the 70s, like drinking and driving or whatever was legal back then, like, they're going to be like, what the heck? You guys did this when you were our age. And so I think you have to have a modern day approach to this. And so we're in discussions. We've done the presentation at an all boys school. It was very well received, and it was for kids mostly getting caught using cannabis on campus is how it kind of started.
Oh, I see.
And I said, yeah, don't send them home. Just make me talk to science, like to them for hours on end. They'll never use cannabis again. They'll be like, anything anything but those lectures. No, but the response has been really great. We also did some troubled young adults who, you know, were living in halfway houses, and we did this event at a community college where they could come and ask questions. I was, there was this amazing moment. There was this really amazing moment where someone was talking about all these cannabis products and hemp products are available, like the Delta 8, the Delta 10s, the HHC, all this stuff. And she asked, she said, excuse me, do they not test these on humans before they sell them to us? And I said, no, there's no human testing. They just test them on you. And she had this look on her face, and she looked around. She's like, is anyone else listening to this? They don't even test these products on humans before they give them to us. And, you know, it was like, it was really, it was kind of amazing moment. Like, wow, I reached one, you know, and making these kind of informed decisions and being able to read a label, understand what's in it, what's not in it. Is it really cannabis? Could it be something else? And I think that they were fairly responsive to understanding that approach, you know. And I think, you know, this is so that's one area, and we've been doing some research with them, these groups of like troubled teens and high schoolers, assessing their knowledge and attitudes about cannabis before and after getting some modern day information that's not intended to scare them.
Right. Well, no, and that's great. And that whole premise of informing so people can make reasonable choices based on reasonable data, that's huge. And I imagine for a lot of the adolescents folks and the younger kids, those kind of choices are not there. And when it becomes available to them, their receptivity, I would expect, might kick up a few notches. So it's,
yeah, especially if you turn 18, it's like, well, do I buy cigarettes? Do I buy cannabis? Like, I have all these new rights. Which ones should I leverage first? And it's like, maybe none of them. Maybe you should learn more.
Right.
So I think that, yeah, exactly. Because it's not necessarily about, you know, tomorrow or next week. It's about, you know, their lives moving forward and having information that I wish I had other people had to help navigate, you know, and also there's an explosion of products out there. I mean, it's the innovation in the cannabis industry is really great, and it's really frightening from a public health perspective, because you see amazing processes, amazing products, amazing ideas, and people are taking it to the street. They are rolling them out, and as fast as they can come up with something new, it's like as soon as you start to understand one product, it may or may not have, you know, have a lasting impact or staying power. They're on to something else. So it's I think it's a really amazing time, I think, for innovation in the cannabis space. And I think we're just like, you know, with the way you talk about the 600-acre hemp field, I'm like, yeah, this is just the beginning of folks being able to use all these cool tools and resources to, you know, like make the best products they can with the best impact.
Sure. And I really appreciate, I could have this conversation for the next 4 hours. I think I'm going to kind of bring the video to an end a little bit. But I do appreciate your insight, and I wish you the best of luck in all the endeavors you guys are doing. And I'm just going to throw in there, if there is anything I can do to help you in that mission, you know where to find me and what I can do. So,
well, thank you, Carrie. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you inviting me onto your platform, and yeah, I look forward to our paths crossing.
Exactly. Yeah, me too. So I'm going to go ahead and disengage the recording.